All right, I have it figured out. You guys remember Rocky and Bullwinkle? Yeah, the moose and the squirrel. Well, clearly Ragnir is the squirrel, which means that Loki, whatever he transformed into, has to clearly be a moose. And then we can have Rocky and Bullwinkle, and then we could just go along with the story. There you go. Solved it. Okay. Hey, everybody. Techie 101 and Barry back again. First proper One Piece video of 2026. Yesterday was the Mihawk wine video thing. We're actually talking about stuff that's pertinent and relevant to the story today. All right. So, not to say Mihawk's wine collection isn't, but that remains to be seen. All right. What does Loki transform into with his legendary devil fruit? All right, so we've seen this in the last chapter, chapter 1170. It was, in fact, confirmed he did eat a devil fruit. Even that was kind of out a little bit because, like, we're not really sure because we knew Ragnir had some powers with it just itself. And so a lot of ideas were like, well, what if Ragnir was the one that has the devil fruit and Loki doesn't have one? And they just chained him up with Sea Prism to contain the hammer. And also Sea Prism is like unbreakable in the One Piece world. So like even if Loki didn't have a devil fruit, being chained up with that stuff still would make sense. But no. Last chapter, 100% confirmed. Loki did in fact eat a devil fruit. And he has this power and he transformed. It seems to be a mythical zone. He transformed into his hybrid form and absolutely shredded Harald. All right, so I just want to pause for a moment and go over that fight really quick because it wasn't a fight. It was a damn massacre, all right? Loki goes into his hybrid form. We can tell that based off of the silhouette. It seemed like he was still like anthropomorphic, like he was standing up on two legs. He had the elongated head. He had the horns coming out of him. He was having a clawed hand that he was like holding up Harald. But like, yeah, Harald that was enhanced with Emu's seal and has become brainwashed, evil Harald sees Loki and is like, Loki, my son, you have eaten the devil fruit. Show me its power. And he charges at Loki. Loki just basically slaps Harald away. Just like, and then that was it. That was it. Sent him flying into a wall, keeping in mind now that Loki and Harald are like comparable in terms of size. They both have ancient giant lineage in them. So just swats him away. And then Harald gets back up after that, and he begins to heal because of the powers of the Covenant seal. But his entire left, like that attack would have straight up killed Harald if he did not have the seal to regenerate and he didn't have the immortality of the God's Knights that Emu gave him, all right? That attack would have one-shot the King of the Giants, Harald, no questions asked, okay? Because he gets back up after that. His arm is completely maimed. Like, his arm is almost, like, falling off. He has giant, not just scratches on his body. Like, you can see the other side of him, right? Like, these parts of his body are just gone. Half of his face is just gone. You could see right through it. And then it begins to heal back up, all right? So, I feel like, yes, because Harald has the ability to regenerate, that attack might have gotten a little bit like the impact of that might have been a little less, but I want you to just think about just the sheer damage that just like a casual swipe from whatever the hell Loki just turned into was able to one-shot Harald. A character that even before had the contract Covenant seal, which gave him a strength and endurance and boost of regeneration, gave him a healing factor and all that stuff. Even before all of that, was incredibly tough, incredibly strong, clashed with rocks, all the other crazy stuff we've seen Harald be able to do in this flashback up until now, all right? So we all on the same page there, right? Okay, so then, yeah, Loki just proceeds, in honestly a little bit of a rage. He's losing himself a little bit there just because this is his own father that he's forced to kill, basically. And so you just see him slashing and hacking and just going at it. And just Harald has no way to respond to this. He can't parry any of these attacks. He's not trying to dodge. He can't dodge, and it's just like boom, 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 and just finally got to the point where Loki is holding him up. He's dead to rights at this point, and we see the silhouette. Now, personally, I thought the silhouette looked honestly like a fox a little bit, just the way the nose was kind of like pointed. It sort of looked like a mythical fox sort of creature. but I didn't immediately think of any kind of like mythical fox in Norse mythology. So I immediately just went to Fenrir, which is like another Canaan. You know, it's like it's a dog, it's a wolf, and in Norse mythology, Fenrir is the son of Loki. Don't ask me how that works. Norse mythology is weird, but Fenrir is the son of Loki. It's canon, all right? So I went along with that. A lot of other people started throwing out, well, it's a dragon. It looked more dragon-esque to me, which I didn't really see at first, but I was thinking more of like D&D kind of dragon, like a red dragon. And I'm like, Loki doesn't look like a red dragon or anything like that. But then I looked at the actual, remember, because I'm going off of like, they weren't originally drawn, I think, during the time that the poetic and the poetic and the prose Edda were written. I think they came a little later. Like the artwork of Ratatotsker, the squirrel that runs up and down the Yggdrasil tree. Yeah, that was drawn like much later in like the 17th century or something like that. But there is also a depiction of the Nidhogg, the dragon or the serpent at the bottom, the base, the roots of the Yggdrasil that is like gnawing on the roots of the tree constantly, right? And that creature, at least in this depiction, looks a little bit closer to what Loki turned into. He even has the horns sticking out of his head. Now, Loki already had those, so whatever hybrid form he goes into is also going to have the horns as well. But I'm just saying, like, this form, this more like serpentine-esque look of the Nidhogg does resemble what, like, at least the shape of the face as well looks like similar to what Loki turned into. It also might be a really good example of foreshadowing because you had Killingham's nightmare creatures that emerged, right? And they are also a bunch of monsters like the Nidhogg and the Jormungandr and Loki himself and the sun god Nika that all of the children of Elbaf were afraid of, right? And so we had a nightmare version of the sun god and a nightmare version of Loki. And we still have Loki in the story, right? And so having a nightmare version of the Nidhogg and then Loki turning into that thing, that would make sense too. Fenrir was also part of the nightmare creatures, by the way. So there's like, I guess there's a way of looking at that. You could say that like Oda wouldn't double dip with the like, oh, there was a nightmare creature of Fenrir and then Loki turns into Fenrir, or he might pick something different altogether. I think it's fair to assume that both Ratatotsker, the squirrel, which we don't know his name is Ratatotsker. I guess closest thing we know is that the squirrel's name is just Ragnir. But it seems Ratatotsker, Ragnir, and Loki both have mythical zones. That seems to be the general idea. We've seen like the hybrid form when the squirrel, got attacked by Loki and then reverted into the hybrid squirrel hammer form. So it was a squirrel with a hammer on top of its head, right? That was part of its head, right? So we see that form. And then we also see the pure squirrel form that it goes into as well when Loki defeats it. And it was sort of just like, acknowledging Loki as the one that is, you are worthy of consuming the legendary devil fruit of Elbaf, right? So we've seen the full hammer form, we've seen the hybrid form, and we've seen just the squirrel form, all right? This seems to be a Zoan to me, and if it has these 3 stages that we typically see with a Zoan, it has to be that. I guess it could be a paramecia in the same way that like Mr. 1 can turn into bladed weapons with the Supa Supa Nomi, or Baby 5 with the armed fruit, the Buki Buki Nomi. I guess it could be something similar to that, but and there are Zoans that do break this rule if Oda wants it to be fun. Really the only one is Tamago's, Baron Tamago's Tama Tama Nomi, the egg fruit. It also has 3 forms, but it works completely different from all the other Zoans where he's stuck in a form, and then when he's broken, when the egg breaks, he transforms into the chick, and then after that into the rooster, and then if the rooster's killed, he goes back to the egg form, and it's just that, so that's a Zoan. It was confirmed to be a Zoan, but it's the weirdest one ever. So I guess if Oda wanted to, he could do something like that with Ragnir, with Ratatotsker, but I'm pretty sure, yeah, they both have mythical Zoans. And yeah, it is kind of, we've seen a lot of mythical Zoans in this story. Like, we certainly have. There's more mythical Zoans now than there are Logias, and it was mentioned the mythical Zoans were actually more rare than the Logias. So either Oda needs to start introducing more Logias. I think maybe Oda might have ran out of elements that he thinks might fit for Logias, because we haven't seen a new one in quite some time. The last Logia we saw Well, I guess it was Aramaki's. Aramaki's was the last Logia. That wasn't too long ago. But before Aramaki, it was like Punk Hazard, right? Like, so Aramaki showed up in like what, like 2021 that we finally got to see him in full view, and 2022 maybe. It was not that long ago. It was right around when Film Red came out. And then before that, Punk Hazard with Caesar and Monet was like 2012 or something like that. Like, it was a while. We haven't seen that many Logias. We need to get like the Mercury Logia or the Plasma Logia. Come on, Oda. There's options for Logias out there, right? And I think, but it is just really the best of both worlds when it comes to a mythical zone, because you get like a really cool badass animal form, and you get an extra ability that is essentially a paramecia ability, right? So like, I think Oda's just like, yeah, let's go with it, right? Yeah. So in this case, I think it would be fine. It does make a lot of sense here. So what is the super special extra ability that Loki has in his form, whether it be the Needhog or Fenrir or whatever else he transforms into, some sort of fox creature? So you could just say, because Harald did say, Loki, my son. I don't know why I do that. That's just like, Loki, my son, that is how I always address you. You have the power of the conqueror inside of you. Implying that, yeah, Loki has conqueror's hockey. Or implying that Loki was always meant to rule over Elbaf. There's a couple of different ways you could interpret that. Did the Devil Fruit itself bestow Conqueror's hockey upon Loki? By the way, just as a side note with that, I really hope that never happens in the story. Some people have thrown out there as like their own like fan-made devil fruits, like it's the hockey no me. Like I've seen a lot of those, you know, like fan fictions and theories over the years. You know, it's the hockey fruit. You eat it and you get Conqueror's hockey. I'd be like, I really don't want that to be the case. The whole point of hockey is it is your own will, your own ambition that fuels it, all right? And you have the disposition of a conqueror or a king, or you don't, all right? Like, that's how it goes. And you can maybe get that later, but it's through your own training and your own personal journey you go through. It isn't the idea that it could just be bestowed upon you, like the disposition of a conqueror is just given to you by eating a devil fruit. I really don't like that idea. So I hope that never happens in the story. So I think what Harald meant by that is like, yeah, sure, you have the disposition of the conqueror, meaning you have what it takes to be the ruler of Elbaf, and even more so than maybe any of the other kings that came before. Because Harald even mentioned that, like, the reason that legendary devil fruit has not been eaten is not because the former kings of Elbaf have attempted to eat it. Haven't attempted to eat it. It's because Ragnir was the guardian protecting it this entire time. So just like how when Loki showed up and one-shot Harald, essentially, don't overlook that. Also, don't overlook the fight between the squirrel and Loki. I know the fight was kind of goofy because the hammer turned into a squirrel. I'm aware how weird that was, okay? There's a meme out right now that hammer, that squirrel, is Yonko level. And you know what? Yes! Yes, it effectively has to be. Yes. All right? Ratatotsker is the most badass squirrel that ever squirreled ever. All right? It's gonna kick your ass hard. Man, if that squirrel was present at Whole Cake or Wano, shit would have went different. I'll tell you what. All right? Now, you could say that kind of diminishes the actual Yonko. Like, how is Captain Buggy supposed to compete with a damn squirrel hammer? You know? But it also does kind of lead into the mythos of Elbaf. Elbaf, this super ancient island, according to Loki, the primordial world was the very first land that ever existed on the planet. I'm inclined to actually take that at face value. I actually think that is the case because we have two giant trees in One Piece. We have the mother tree Eve, that's where Fishman Island is, a pretty ancient location, and then we have the treasure tree Adam, the Yggdrasil tree, where Elbaf is at, okay? So, like, the idea that the whole planet was like one super ocean at one point, like just like our planet at the very beginning, it was just one big ocean. You know, our planet was molten rock, and then it cooled, and we had ocean, and then land sort of emerged out of that, okay? You could have something similar with Blue Planet, where, you know, the first, the tree grew, and then the land popped up around the tree, and that was the first land in the world, right? So you could have, like, all these, like, ancient lore, and we have the sun god Nika and other deities and things like that come from Elbaf. So the idea that there's some ancient devil fruit and some ancient mythical hammer that's like the power of the gods, Elbaf, you know, it makes sense to me. Makes sense to me. All right, so just don't doubt the power of that hammer. Please do not, okay? Wonder also if Harald ever attempted to eat the devil fruit. Because the way he was phrasing it was like, there were other kings that came before, and they all tried to eat the devil fruit, and they were never a match for Ragnir. Ragnir never deemed them worthy. Seems to imply Harald would have at least attempted once. In fact, I think he basically said that he did, because after he was brainwashed, he was like, oh, Ragnir, will not accept you, Loki, but now that I'm strong enough, I will surely be able to, right? Okay. And it is a little bit, it is kind of curious. I think if Harald did actually make it to the treasure chamber and did fight against Ragnir, and if all you need to do is, like, just physically prove yourself as stronger than Ragnir, or at least powerful enough. Like, we don't know. Ragnir, the squirrel, might be, like, interested in maybe the character of the individual as well. It might not just be physical strength, or maybe it is. If you just beat down the squirrel hard enough, eventually it'll just give up and surrender the devil fruit to you. Or maybe, Ratatotska or Ragnir sensed something within Loki, like, oh, you are the chosen one, or some bullshit like that. I don't know. But, like, if Harald would have made it there, he probably would have been able to eat the devil fruit, at least by force, if nothing else. And then, as Jarl would have said, it would have been the end of the world as we know it if evil Harald would have consumed that devil fruit, right? So, a whole line of giants up until now have not been able to beat that hammer, that squirrel hammer, okay? Where did this all begin? Who originally put that legendary devil fruit in the treasure chamber? Who originally set Ragnir to guard it? Also brings up an interesting question, considering Ragnir, how old? I mean, like this hammer would have to be, like, at least as old as the Void Century. I'm assuming that's probably where all this stuff started, because it is the Void Century. So let's assume there was a giant king that had the power of Loki, that Loki has right now, the legendary devil fruit, during the time of Joy Boy and Davy Jones and everything like that. All right? And then died, and the fruit got reincarnated on Elbaf, and it was placed in the chest, and Ragnir, a hammer that has consumed the mythical Zoan Ratatotsker, who is like a deity or a demigod or something like that, to the point where I guess doesn't age and doesn't die naturally, right? Was set there. Maybe not necessarily in squirrel form, but maybe when it's in, like, hammer form, it, like, extends its life. It also could be like that, because when we first see it, when Loki opened the door, it's in its hammer form. So maybe it goes into the hammer form to, like, stasis until a next challenger emerges or some shit like that, right? And so Loki walks in, and then it transforms and it attacks, okay? And that's the idea, right? At any rate, Ratatotsker seemed very happy to see I keep saying Luffy. It's just like Luffy, Loki, Lucci. Just hope to God Lucci doesn't show up at Elbaf, because it's going to get really confusing then. Luffy fought against Lucci and Loki. Yeah. Just like, that would be a mess. All right, but anyway. So, Ragnir seemed very happy over the idea that, like, oh, finally my purpose has been fulfilled. Somebody, a worthy giant, will now finally consume the legendary devil fruit. And it's probably something similar to, like, Emmett and Joy Boy, where Emmett was just so happy and gleeful that Luffy had come back and the powers of Joy Boy had resurrected, and Emmett was just like, I'm so happy to see you again, Joy Boy, it's been so long. And Luffy's like, who are you talking about? My name's Luffy. Oh, okay. Well, it's still so nice to see you again. It's the same deal where the squirrel... Yeah, let's throw the squirrel on Joy Boy's crew, too. All right, so Joy Boy had a giant robot, a giant elephant. Let's throw Biblo the owl in there, too. And a hammer squirrel. Let's throw all of that on there. Yeah, Joy Boy's crew was just a crew of animals, which makes sense considering the Noah is tied to him, which, my God, is that a thing? I don't know. But anyway, yeah, Joy Boy just had a bunch of animals on his crew and a robot. There's like, there it is. Anyway, it could have been the same deal. Like, the ancient giant king had Ragnir and then died, and then Ragnir was sad and was like, am I ever going to see you again? And it's like, one day, Ragnir, I will be resurrected. Watch over the devil fruit. You'll know when the time comes. And then he dies, and the fruit gets placed in there, and then so many giant kings have come and gone in the, 800, 900 years since then, and eventually you end up with Loki. And so Loki has the power, and he killed his dad with the powers of this mythical, zone of Elbaf, and then also with a mighty lightning strike, slayed Harald, his own father. Then what happens after? I don't know, because Gabon and Shanks were right there. They got to witness everything. The only thing I could really think of that makes sense is like Loki just kind of shirks his dad's desires. Like, I know dad wanted me to be the king and do everything, but I'm going to choose to save his reputation over his last wishes. Shanks, Gabon, don't say anything to anybody about this. I'm leaving. And then he leaves. And then something, the whole thing with Big Mom's family and Lola happens at some point. Like when he's out at sea, that has to occur then. There's like no other timeline where this makes sense. And then Shanks goes to bring him back at some points. But if Shanks was present and he knew, unless Shanks was like, maybe he didn't agree with the decision, maybe Loki was like, I want my dad's reputation to be sustained. And then Shanks was like, no, Loki, the people deserve to know the truth. And your father told you need to be the king and you need to tell stuff about what's happening. So maybe Loki and Shanks disagreed on that. And Loki was like, and Loki does have a grudge with Shanks. We assumed the grudge was because Shanks beat the shit out of him and tied him to a tree. But maybe it's something else that even came before that. Maybe it was like that Shanks and Loki had a disagreement on the way that this whole situation should be handled. And Loki's like, no, my father's reputation's worth more than mine. And Shanks is like, no, it has to be the way that Harald wanted. And Loki's like, screw you. Who are you? You're just a human. You're just a random-ass human. That was my father I just had to kill, for God's sake. You know what I mean? So it led to a whole disagreement there. And then Gabon's in the back. He's like, okay, now, everybody, let's just calm down. And then Loki gets like, screw this, and he leaves. He just leaves the island, right? And then Shanks is like, I need to bring him back. This isn't going to... He needs to be here. He needs to be in Elbaf. So Shanks gets his crew together, which the red hair crew does exist at this point, gets his crew together, and then for the next 6 years... Well, no, not 6 years. It was 14 years ago this occurred, and then 6 years ago is when he got brought back to Elbaf. So for the next 8 years, Loki's wandering the Grand Line, being chased after by Shanks, I guess. And at some point he meets Lola, and at some point he gets the special bounty of like something like 2 billion something berries from the world government. And then 6 years ago, Shanks grabs him, eventually hauls him back to Elbaf. They chain him to a tree. That's the same year Shanks becomes a Yonko, so he gets the title there. Yeah, and then Gabon just doesn't tell Hyrudin or anybody else about what actually happened at the castle. He's just busy hanging out with Ripley the whole time. And occasionally he does go out into the sea and wander around, like he went to go visit Crocus during the cover page and all that stuff. But yeah, Gabon knew everything. Shanks knew everything. They were all there. They witnessed all of it from the start to, not the start to finish, but they knew that Harald was manipulated by the contract seals. Shanks had the same seals, so he knows the ability. He's the one that explained it to Gabon. He knew everything. They could have went to the people of Elbaf and been like, all right, listen, so, now granted, this would be an awkward conversation to have, all right? But if it was Loki and Gabon and Shanks that were all present there, because Gabon does hold some sway in Elbaf and things like that. Listen, turns out the world government is evil, and Harald was manipulated by them and was ordered to amass an army. Actually, I don't know if they know about that. Jarl might, but he has a sword through his head. Oh, this is going to be hard to explain. Oh, this is going to be awkward. Even Gabon as like a friend to the giants. Shanks is there too, but this is... I don't know if Shanks has established himself as like a... I think the whole reason that the giants trust him so much is because he brought Loki back. That event hasn't happened yet. And Loki burned an entire town down. So like, oh man, this is... The more I think about this is tough. This is really tough. It would have to be Gabon, Shanks, and Loki, announcing to the country that Harald was actually beguiled and fooled by the world government. The world government has brainwashing mind control abilities. Harald was manipulated, and we had to kill him. By the way, Loki's your new king now. There's really no way to take that where I think the people of Elbaf were like, all right, Loki, all hail King Loki. Like, I don't think there's going to be an easy way to, like, even Gabon would be like, listen, guys, I know this is hard to understand, but you need to listen to this. They could explain everything about the contract seals and all that shit. I still think the people of Elbaf would be like, I don't know about that. This all happened. Are there anybody else that could collaborate the story? Anybody? What about all the guards in the castle? Oh, Oh, they're all dead. All of them. Yeah, all 113 of them. They're all dead. Huh. So the king is dead. All of the king's men are dead. And we have Shanks, who at this point is just a random pirate from off of Elbaf. Gabon, who's, like a friend of the Giants, I guess. He's a trustworthy guy. And then Loki, the guy that's literally been giving us nothing but hell since the time that he was running around as a kid, letting animals loose in the villages and burning the alcohol village down. Those are the only people that tell us that Harald turned out to be fooled and tricked into being an evil thrall. And so they had to murder him. Harald the Beloved. Oh, yeah, that's not going to work. Okay, now this makes more sense now. Now, it still doesn't, I feel like at some point in the last 14 years, Gabon or Shanks should have went to Hyrudin at least and explained this to Hyrudin. All right, he's Loki's brother. He was Harald's son. He deserves to at least know the truth here, and they didn't do that. All right, now Harald probably wouldn't have, Hyrudin wouldn't have believed it, but they at least should have made the attempt. All right, they should have made the attempt at least. Like, Gabon should, like, Hyrudin gets back to the country after all this shit goes down, and he's like, Father, no, Loki, why, you son of a bitch, And then Gabon should have been like, all right, Hyrudin, I can tell you what happened. It's going to be a wild story. You're probably not going to believe me, but you have my word. You have my word that this is true, that this actually happened. And then so Gabon explains the story to him. Hyrudin to be like, I don't believe you, ya son. You're just lying to cover for Loki. I'd be like, no, it actually happened, but you don't have to believe it, but that's what happened, right? That seems to have never occurred, all right? Also, other option, there could be some mind-wiping amnesia bullshit. I really hope it's not that, because we've already done, I think, the amnesia angle, memory manipulation enough in the story, unless Pudding shows up out of nowhere and uses her memory powers, which doesn't make any sense for that to happen. Wait a minute. Hold on a second here. Wait. Okay, this flashback is 14 years ago, so Pudding is 2, so I doubt she even has the memory powers. But my point is, maybe somebody else might? Somebody shows up, like some random-ass character shows up at the last minute. By the way, I have the memory powers. Okay, everyone, bye, and then leaves. Okay, that's grasping at straws there a little bit, but I don't want there to be memory bullshit. I don't want there to be any crap which is like, oh yeah, the memory. Jarl being the lone exception because he does have a sword through his head, so that makes sense if he lost a little bit of memory. But Gabon and Shanks and Loki should remember the whole thing, and Loki does because he's the one telling the story. Anyway, that's the video. A lot of stuff happening in the last chapter. We got still a little bit of a break until, the next one comes out 1171. That's probably not going to be more until like the middle of January. But yeah, new year, talking about One Piece again in the current storyline. We're done with all the Devil Fruit discussions. I don't know what this year's project is going to be. We'll have to figure out something else. But let me know down below. Comment down below what your what my projects should be, what I should be discussing through the course of the year. Let me know. Teching. Signing out. Later, everybody.